Okay, guys. So today we are going to be um, finishing up my section in terms of chapter 3 of the Exploring Leadership textbook, which brings to the end my contributions in terms of teaching the class. The content that is going to be examined by you guys will, in fact, bring to bear further development of today's chapter. So the linkage between today's chapter and the rest of the work is going to be critical, which is why it's important you kind of get this going. All right, so everybody seeing this is clear enough for everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Okay, good. All right, so in terms of chapter 3, what we're going to be looking at is um, we're going to be looking at the overview of the relational leadership model. This is going to be offered to you as an option for you to develop your own leadership philosophy moving forward. To give you some backstory into the creation of this program, in 2010, the country was kind of hit with a lot of very problematic issues, and it exhibited some forms of leadership behavior that indicated that there might have been a bit of a gap between what we expected of leaders around us and what we actually got. And that led to the president of the college at the time asking for a course to be developed for all programs in the college that spoke to a different style or type of leadership that put ethics at the corner as one of the cornerstones of it. And thus we created this program based on the relational leadership or model. That's one of the reasons why we have this coming across here. So that's the backstory to it. And then eventually, when it was launched, he was very happy with the circumstances under which we. Sorry, I forgot to put on my camera. He was very pleased with what was going on at the time, and it became quite an interesting course for students to do. So I hope you all, in doing this course, I hope you all get to understand the sort of necessary requirements that gave up with this. So starting to look at the model, first off, we have to remember that it's called the relationship model or the relational leadership model or RLM model because it focuses our attention upon not the leader, but the relationship that leaders develop with their followers. So that the only way we can get anything done is through positive relationships. Secondly, the other element that is of importance is the context in which that leadership is taking place. So remember when we were looking at some of the past theories, they ignored the context in which leadership was taking place, and that led to some weaknesses in the model. So this model, from the very outset, focuses its attention on the relationship between the leaders and followers, and similarly takes in consideration the nature of the relationships and the context in which it's going to be taking place. Because if we think about it, the nature of your relationship with leaders at work as opposed to your classroom or at home or in your community, be it in church or if you're a member of some sort of community group, the nature and the context of, in where you're meeting puts different pressures on the individuals in leadership positions to behave in certain manners. So that, like at work, you have the authorization or the authority of the position of being a manager that gives you the power over people to be able to dictate some of their activities. However, in a community-based organization, that doesn't exist. Although somebody may be elected into the office of being the president of the club or the president of the committee or whatever, it doesn't mean that they can utilize that position to force people to do anything in the organization. They have to utilize different techniques to encourage people to want to participate and help build the the community that you're looking at. So there are different sets of tools, different types of leadership and management techniques that you have to utilize depending upon the context in which you're exercising your leadership. All right, so the model immediately recognizes that situation. Another element that gave problems in the early parts, if we remember from the earlier models, was defining what is leadership. And if we remember here, leadership is a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. And that's important that they qualify the change that they're looking at as being positive. And we'd have to examine that because when we talk about positive change, we're talking about positive change to everybody, not just the organization, but also the community in which you serve and the wider environment and the sort of the global perspective of the organization's activities. So relational leadership is going to involve focusing on 5 components: purpose, all right, inclusivity, empowerment, ethics, and process orientation. So those are the 5 key pieces of the process that we're going to be paying attention to. And for those of you who are more visual in your learning style, this is a diagram that tries to give you an image of what we're looking at. So we see purpose is central, inclusivity, empowerment, and ethical behavior, all subsets or interlinked with it, and everything is housed within a process orientation. So we're going to spend time today going through the various components of the relational leadership model that we're speaking about. But before that, we want to talk about its application. So the leadership model that we're presenting here is not something that describes what we currently do. It speaks primarily to a model to which we would like to move towards. So in essence, it's an ideal, and we're trying to move all of our leaders into aspirational models like this. Now, some people you might find already exhibit some of these features or some of these characteristics, but at the end of the day, it's not a model that is very popular with people because of the difficulty of dealing with it, and that's something that we're going to be looking at. So therefore, when we're looking at this, we're going to be paying attention to those 5 elements that we spoke about before. Of course, one of the first elements is purpose, and purpose plays a very important role, so much so that in the presentations that we have, there's an entire group that's going to be dealing with vision and strategic direction, which is where we get purpose from. So that presentation is going to be critical in relation to that. All right. Uh, grab this, bring it down. All right. One of the things that we have to pay attention to is how is that purpose developed? Is the organization vision driven or is it position driven? And there's a difference there with how an organization operates. In a position driven organization, it means that the person who's in the leadership position drives all activities and drives the organization into a particular direction. Without that person being there, the organization can find itself lost. A stronger organization would be one that's vision driven, where there is a vision that has been developed within the organization that drives the activities of the organization moving forward. So that's something that we have to pay attention to, because a lot of times, if you've ever been members of organizations, especially community-based organizations, you'd find that a lack of drive from the person in charge oftentimes stymies the entire organization. And that's because primarily the organization is position driven. If, however, the organization has a strong overarching vision that supersedes the person sitting in the office, you can find yourself moving forward regardless of the non participation of leadership in that activity, because at least you have some guiding principle that's telling you this is what we're supposed to be doing. These are our goals and objectives. We'll get back to this in a little more detail in a little bit. We come back to this area of knowing being doing. At the beginning of the process, we spoke about this before. The knowing being doing is you as an individual, you have to go through this exercise of knowing being doing on a regular basis to be able to develop yourself as a leader or potential leader. It means that you have to get to know yourself very well. And part of knowing yourself is knowing what you're capable of. That is assessing your knowledge base, assessing your skills. So much so that you need to be comfortable in the technical aspects of the organization. That's something that you're going to have to pay attention to. You have to be aware of how other people see you. That's the being element. And then, of course, you have to act accordingly based upon the information that you have there. Now, this is a process that is going to be circular in nature because you're going to have to always go through that process. And as you go through that process, we should be developing a greater sense of perspective, and that perspective should be cycling outwards, or because you should be increasing your field of perception and understanding. Um, it's important because why we have to keep on doing this is because nothing stays stagnant. Your information base is not going to stay the same. As you grow and experience more, your knowledge base is going to grow. Your belief structure is also going to change over time because things you believed in the past as being acceptable forms of behavior, you may augment or change or add different things. So it's going to be a never ending process of learning. And that's important because as a leader, you have to exhibit that characteristic of lifelong learning. That is something that you should be encouraging in your people. Um, Palmer used the knowing being doing, and he sort of compares it to head, heart, and practice. And in particular, he was looking at this in the context of teaching and learning. And I know a lot of you um, should have been affected by this in one way or the other, hopefully in a positive manner. And the way that will come about is coming across teachers who are technically very, very good with their field. They're very knowledgeable, but they lack the passion to teach. And that then impacts upon the practice that they engage in. As opposed to that, hopefully you've had the experience of, again, quite knowledgeable teachers with a good passion for their profession, and that influences the way in which their practice takes place. Anybody has any examples of teachers that they've encountered in their lifetime who exhibits this sort of activity? Anybody? Miss King, for example. I am talking about from all the way back in your primary school days to now.
Um, well, I guess I would say there was a time when I was in primary school and getting ready to write SEA. I
Uh-huh.
had a teacher who um she pushed me a lot
Right.
to be better and she helped me a lot, I guess. That's all I could say.
Well, okay. Did you benefit from that interest that she showed in you? You think?
Yes, I
All right.
believe so.
Have you found that that has repeated itself with other teachers you've met since then? Because that's a long time back. Have you come across?
Not not really.
You haven't come across any passionate teachers along the way.
Um, well, I guess I would say probably my recent teachers in my graphic design field.
All right. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. And do you think it might have been something to do with your learning preferences?
Maybe.
What are your primary learning preferences?
Well, I would say I'm mostly a visual learner.
Uh huh. Did you ever do the VOC test?
Pardon? The what test?
VOC test.
No.
You never did it? All right. I'll encourage you to go to the e-classroom, go to this link down here, um, this learning style inventory, and do this test. This is part of
Okay.
your own self-development here. You can do the personality test as well, but the VARC test is one that teaches you or assesses your learning styles. And it's called VARC because VARC stands for visual, oral, read, write, and kinesthetic. And what happens in schools is that the vast majority of education is designed around oral and read write. So there's a heavy focus in AR, the AR areas, but very limited focus on visual and kinesthetic. Kinesthetic is even worse. Kinesthetic learners tend to be the ones that get left behind. All right, so because the system doesn't allow for a lot of practical activities. There's a lot of shut up and listen to what I say and write it down. And if you have any sort of preferences in the visual and kinesthetic, especially kinesthetic, it creates a lot of issues there for learners because that it doesn't match your style. So hopefully, you'd come across situations where that has happened. Anybody had a really bad experience with any of your teachers that you could make a connection with to this paradox that he's talking about here? Thanks a lot for sharing, Miss King. Miss Murray or Ariana, Miss Ramdas. None of you all have met passionate teachers, even while you're here in Costa. That's interesting.
So,
Hi, Miss Murray.
so I was answering, I said that yes, I had some past
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
uh,
in what stage of your development did you meet these people?
in high school.
And yes, that's actually one of the most primary school
Yeah,
and
but
secondary school is probably one of the most important places to meet passionate teachers. That helps to also determine a lot of the direction you end up taking in life too. Would you say so?
yes,
Hmm. What area were they teaching you? What subject areas?
um, she was only teaching me like in lower form, but when I get into upper form, I didn't pick any subjects at, but she was more homeroom teacher.
Right. Okay. So at least you still
So
had
yeah,
an overall influence on you. Yes. Let me ask you
yeah.
the opposite. Have you come across lecturers or teachers that you've had really horrible experiences with?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's fortunate because our education system is it kind of breeds a sort of disregard because a lot of people who I've met as teachers now they lack the heart part. They have a lot of intellect and the skills are there, but there's a difference between knowing something and teaching something, and it shows itself in the practice of the individual. So I'm hoping that you can understand the comparison that Palmer is trying to make based upon the knowing being doing activity and this head heart and practice, all right? Because the head is what you know, the heart is your belief structure, and your practice is impacted by what you know and how what you believe, all right? That kind of makes a lot of sense there. He argues that we need a synthesis of all three components in the teaching profession, no, the teaching process, and the same applies in the leadership process. And he's quite right about that, at least from the point of view of the model. Um, the reason being is that if people trust you, they will work well with you. But if they don't trust you, they're not going to work well with you. And it's the same thing for leaders. Leaders who are competent and are passionate will encourage activity, will encourage involvement. But it doesn't work for a leader who's incompetent. And some of you here may have had experience with leadership in that context. Anybody willing to share an example of good or bad experiences you've had with leaders or teachers that you've had before. Don't be afraid to say negative things, if you have to say it. This is the place to examine those feelings and experiences. Mr. Singh, any experiences you'd like to contribute? Hmm. Zaria, Ms. Juman, everybody's being shy tonight. Remember when you all are presenting, you're going to be having the same issue too. Yeah? Go ahead. All right. So in in leadership, there are four essential skill levels that you need to develop. One, of course, is the technical skills. That will be whatever expertise you're bringing to bear on your organization. Is it, if it's from a technical point of view, is it managerial, whatever it is, petrochemicals, whatever industry you're in, your technical skills have to be present because that's the first requirement that they talk about. The others, interpersonal skills, that speaks to your ability to effectively communicate, conceptualization skills, which is your ability to be able to think creatively, and tactical skills, which has to do with how well you work with teams and other people in and around the organization. Those are skills oftentimes ignored in the technical training of people, especially um, especially in any area that is highly specialized. So you come across, for example, doctors who are unable to communicate effectively, highly skilled doctors, but they have very poor bedside manner. That's the term you utilize. They don't work well in teams. They're very good at working by themselves, but they don't work nicely with each other. Conceptualization skills tend to be very limited because they're fixed only on their thinking based upon where they see themselves in terms of their technical abilities. So this is especially true for engineers. And I remember in a valedictorian speech or keynote address that was given by Professor Julian, who was critical in the creation and setup of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He spoke about that as being one of the most um, underdeveloped aspects of training in the area of petrochemicals. A lot of very skilled petrochemical engineers were coming out into the market, but they were unable to communicate well, think outside the box, and deal with group work. Now, all of you all are here in the college, and you'd recognize that every class you've done so far, or the vast majority of the classes that you've done, require you to work in teams and groups. It requires you to write and communicate effectively. In the class, I keep on asking you to communicate with me on a verbal sense, to speak to me. And in this class, unfortunately, you're going to have to do it with the whole class in group presentations, group teaching sessions. So that's going to be interesting. Those skills are the most difficult to prepare people in the world of work because oftentimes we don't feel confident enough. But the reason why we're putting that pressure on you in this course, for example, and other courses, is to be able for you to be able to develop those skills, because those skills become critical when you move forward in the world of work. You can't be like, for example, Brianna, you can't be a graphic artist and can't communicate effectively verbally or through your written word. You have to be able to work well with other teams. How many people here have problems with group work? First off, let's. How many people like group work here? By a show of hands. How many people don't like group work? Let me ask it that way. In the college, don't like group work, right? Why is that? Why don't you like group work? Nova, open your mic. Talk to me, Ariana. Ariana, you could also bring your point of view too.
I
Why
had experience with group work. Some
you
of
had
them
what?
did.
You had?
Very bad experience with group work. Nobody doing it. They're part of the work and that kind of thing.
Uh huh. Do you find that it occurs all the same way all the time? Do you have that same issue coming up all the time?
No, not all the time.
Right. So some groups work well. Have you evaluated why some groups work well and why other groups don't?
No, not really.
Why not? If you want to
I
get
don't
group,
know.
you don't know. Okay. All right. Somebody else had their hand up. Let's find out what they think it was. I think it was Ariana, Elizabeth, Miss Ramdas.
Hi.
Hi. You said you didn't like group work.
Yeah, I don't like prefer reason being sometimes students they don't communicate well with them. Like even if you try to like even like go all out for the group, like
Uh,
they doesn't like want to participate and do anything.
mm-hmm. It's sort of like me asking you all to make comments in class and you all just staying quiet, right? Alyssa, would you agree with that, Miss C. Prasad? Miss C. Prasad? No? Welcome, Tiffany. Miss Brown, can I ask you a question? Um, do you like group work? Is Miss Brown here? Yes, Tiffany? Hi, Tiffany. Okay, Ramona, how do you feel about group work?
I've had good experiences when it is everybody actually scheduled and in fact, we had a good one at that perfect time, so everybody was designated what to do and we did it and it was great. And I've also had bad experiences when it has so many people who were really literally one of them experience when they can't do what they were supposed to do. And
Mm-hmm.
it was straight up. So it's
Yes,
hard for now. I think it's not that I was even listening.
that's true. That's quite true. All right, interesting. That's why we have a whole chapter on teams and groups. Miss C. Prasad, you are responsible for that area, so it's
Hi, sir.
interesting.
I'm not hearing you clearly.
Okay,
What was your
so
question that you
I
asked?
was asking you, do you like working in groups and teams?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
All right.
Sometimes you meet persons who are determined to do their work to the best of their ability, and some just, they don't
Just
really care, but they would do something or they would
uh,
do nothing at all. So
okay.
yeah,
So you're telling me that in group work, effective communication is critical, right?
yeah,
Right. And would you say that your ability to negotiate positions and deadlines and stuff like that is also important?
yes, sir. As I
Mm-hmm.
said, like some would be determined, some wouldn't. So
All right. And when it comes to the point of creating PowerPoint presentations and stuff like that, do you think creativity is also critical?
yes, sir. I think for me to learn and to adapt, create like seeing different colors, creativity is something big for me.
All
So
right. Yeah. What degree are you doing?
I'm doing business administration.
All right. So you're developing your technical skills in business administration, but you
Yes, sir.
realize by forcing you all into group work, we are trying to instill in you the other three skill levels: creativity, interpersonal skill, and tactical skills. So you can hate group work as much as you like, but it's one of the greatest teaching tools in the arsenal of assessments. Think about it from that perception or that perspective. All right. I know a lot of us don't like group work. Thank you for sharing, Alyssa. But unfortunately, it is where you need to focus a lot of your attention because past the technical skills, those become the most critical in the world out there. And if it's critical for you just to do your work, think about how critical it is for a leader to be exemplary in these areas of activities. Unfortunately, our creativity tends to get stunted quite early in life because the education system doesn't work well in highly creative environments because our current system thrives on controlled environments. and controlled environments are not necessarily open to a great deal of creativity, which Brianna might have experienced in her schooling, because she would be, um, wanting to do certain things. Like, I remember when I did art, my teachers didn't like the people I drew when we did portrait. Well, not really portraits, but we did figure drawings. My teacher always used to criticize my artwork and saying the woman had no bottom. It was really something else. Uh, it felt, and when you get that kind of discouraging remarks coming from a teacher, what happens to you in terms of your effort that you put into it? Well, anybody wants to take a guess? What happens if you start to get negative feedback? Nova, go ahead.
When you get negative feedback from a teacher, it makes you like not feel motivated to want to do anything in class.
Hmm. Especially
And
something like artwork, yeah.
yeah, and it'll make you like do less, want to do less in class, and that it might overall make you fail the class as well.
Hmm. That's quite true. And so as a teacher, you and as a leader, if you think about it, because the teacher is the leader in the classroom, think about the impact that you're having on people around you in relation to that. All right. So again, things to think about in terms of your process. All right. So we know the being part means that we're talking about your character in terms of your belief structure. And again, this is something that you have to come to grips with. All of you need to start to work through. Now, for some of you, you're pretty young, so your character is still developing. You're still having, developing clear-cut ideas of what is wrong and what is right. Some of you have very open view to things, more flexible view. Other people come from more stringent backgrounds, and you have to find who you are, regardless of what your origins are. Your belief structure is going to be built upon a lot of influences, which is one of the things that you're going to be looking at in terms of your self assessments. In your self assessments, that's one of the things that you're likely to encounter in analyzing yourself. Why do you think the way you think? It's because of a lot of influences that impacted upon you, both positive and negative influences, that help you to determine who you are. And that characteristic, those rules that govern your being, is going to be determining your level of preparedness for being a leader. And that's something you're going to have to pay a great amount of attention. And of course, the doing part is putting all of that into action. So you have a lot of skills, you have all the knowledge in the world, you have a decent sense of self and good idea of what's wrong and right, at least in the current shape of our society. So it means that you start to act. And in acting, you need to be inclusive of the people around you and making sure that you are having the correct type of relationship, because only when you develop those good relationships are you able to actually, I want, for the lack of a better word, to ferment in your organization positive active actions. And of course it would help, of course, if you have a good vision that's going on. Not that that'll help, but it is usually very, very good with that. Now, one of the issues that a lot of leaders face is perfection issues. So some of us might have OCD, and I say some of us because I have a form of OCD. I actually, it gets really bad. I know already when I'm doing things like cleaning. If I get really angry with myself, and it takes a lot longer to clean things, especially like when I'm power washing and stuff like that. I can't stand skipping spots, leaving lines behind. It's annoying the crap out of me. So that problem, though, that fixation on perfection can in fact create a serious problem in organizations where a leader is so fixated on the perfection of getting things done that they fail to do anything. And that perfection speaks to um, the lack well, not only confidence, but the lack of flexibility in making mistakes. Now, if you have a leader who doesn't tolerate making mistakes because they want everything to go right, then they're not really being honest to themselves, because nobody, even organizations, can do anything, any major sort of activity without making some errors along the way. But if you don't tolerate errors and use the errors as learning opportunities, then it speaks to a type of organization that simply doesn't take chances, and that is a negative for an organization. I've actually worked under people like this before, and during the period of their activity, the organization just stagnated because the vast majority of work required pushing forward. But if you're sitting there waiting for all the perfect conditions to fall in place to do something, then nothing's going to happen because you're never going to get perfection. All right. And it meant also that the people working under you would also cease to try to do things because they know that the leader does not tolerate um, doing something and making mistakes. And you know, you get ridiculed in meetings and that type of stuff. It just makes the work environment very hostile and very upsetting for most people. All right, so that's something you want to pay attention to. Now, if we are to be a better leader and encourage that overall learning process, then it's important that we ourselves as a leader promote and help to create that learning environment. One, by showing through example that we are learning, we are in the process of learning and relearning information. By helping others, by putting things together, um, either in sharing information or creating training sessions and sitting in those training sessions with other members of the organization. You know, it helps to bring us all down to the same playing field, so we're all learning together. Those are powerful experiences you can have with leaders in organizations, because we're there together, you know, working together, learning together, helping each other, and that helps in creating a culture in the organization that promotes that learning activity. If you find yourself or feel you're above that situation, then that's a difference. That starts to create a barrier between the leader and the followers, and that creates a distance, which is something that impacts upon the nature of the relationship. So think about it from that perspective as well. All right, and there's no way that any leader is going to know everything. That's an impractical thing, and that a lot of leaders have. We spoke about that before in the earlier chapters. Leaders can't know everything. It's impossible. All right? They may have a wealth of information and knowledge, but it doesn't mean that they know everything. Trust me, that's not the way things work. All right. So let's start to look at the components in one by one. Leadership is purposeful. So meaning that any organization that's getting together must have a purpose. And that purpose has to be something, especially for the relational leadership program, has to be a positive purpose. So the goals of the organization that the relational leadership program promotes would be trying to work in organizations that have a positive outcome, not only for the organization itself and the members of that organization, but for people on the peripheries and people who are affected by the organization. Now, it helps also because as part of the organization, if you are able to um, project that constance of positive change to everybody, including those outside the organization, it gives a sense of satisfaction and justification for the membership to work harder. So it helps to encourage activities. More importantly, if the purpose of the organization is well shared and well accepted by all members of the organization, then it helps with everybody being working on the same page, sort of like, so we all know where we're going and why we're going in that direction. So it's important, therefore, that in organizations we have to create what is called socialized visions as opposed to personalized visions. So what is a personalized vision? That is a vision that is specifically oriented to the person themselves. And they come to the drawing board and this is the vision that they have. Nobody else has any input. We don't have any choices in the matter. This is what the person wants to get done, and that is what we have to go with. Interestingly enough, the organizations that have a lot of this personalized vision tend to have high levels of turnover with staffing and participants because then there's no vested interest in the vision that was created that way. As opposed to that, a socialized vision is one that is built from the ground up, from all the people being involved in the process of creating a vision for an organization or for a committee moving forward. Now, question: how many of you all are familiar with the vision and mission statement of the college? You're attending an organization um, and don't know what its vision and mission statement is. That's horrible. Anybody? So if we go to the home page of the college and we go to About Costat and we scroll down, we can read a lot about the college. Included in that is get rid of this, history of the college, as well as the vision and mission. Here it is, mission and vision statements for the college. All right, this looks familiar, guys. Anybody's familiar with these things? Now, the
Yes,
first
sir.
question, yeah, the first question that probably comes to mind is, what's the difference between a vision and a mission? Anybody? Anybody could tell me the difference between a vision and mission? My business management students, people who've done principles of business management, of management. Can you tell me what's the difference between a vision and a mission statement? Wow. So I'll tell you a
So,
story. Go ahead.
so I'll try. But a vision is something like you'd want to accomplish in the future,
Uh-huh. It's future
and a
driven, yeah.
mission is like a goal.
Okay. Right. Not quite right, but that is why we have a group that is going to be presenting on vision and strategic direction. So, chapter 13, James, Juman, and Murray, you guys are going to be tackling that question um, they have to deal with that.
Uh,
Yes?
I would say, no, I was explaining, I was saying vision is more like a future goal,
Uh huh.
I guess.
Future goal?
And
Mm.
the,
And the mission?
and the mission would be like, what is the purpose? What you're
Uh huh.
doing now?
All right. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. That's closer. That's closer. All right. So the vision is where you want to be in the future. You're correct. It's where you see yourself down the road, and the mission is how you're going to get there. What are the things you're going to do and put in place to be able to facilitate the accomplishment of your vision, and the combination of the two help to create a number of what we call synergies that help to move you forward towards that vision. Now, there's another part that's missing here, and it exists in the organization, but it's kind of um, it. There's another element. It's called I can't remember what it is. We actually have something called the pillars of strategic pillars of operation. Um, but it actually comes from another aspect of vision and mission statements, which is like key competencies and that type of stuff. But as I said, there's a group that's going to get into much more detail here. Now, one of the issues that comes up with, or the problems that come up with vision and mission statements, is how we come to them. So the college, for example, that vision statement that I showed you here, in fact, the vision and mission statement took the college about 2 years to get completed. Now, if you remember, for those of you who may have read the history of of COSTAT, it was established from as far back as 1998. Um, I was actually teaching at John Donaldson Technical Institute at the time, and I was part of the what we call the financial implementation team, and we were able to try and pull together all seven of these institutions together. Along the way, there was actually supposed to be eight, but early on, the Cipriani College dropped out, and then we had MIC dropping out, and then eventually, by the time we created the college, um, UTT came on board and took up sections of John D. San Fernando Tech, GVC, Point Fortin, and EKF. We then MIC had left a long time before they because they went on to a different direction with companies out of Germany at that time. So Nehurst and a lot of the business sections and soft skill areas from most of these institutions went across into the College um, of in fact back then it was called the National College of Trinidad and Tobago. So the by 2000 when the administration was able to set up the the college and give it its official name, which is where the documents were laid in Parliament and was proclaimed. We came into existence officially in the year 2000, but the work from this started from since 1997. Interestingly enough, what started to happen was in order for us to generate this mission and vision statement, we went through an exercise where members of the staff from each of those well, initially eight institutions contributed to the development of the mission. And I know in John Donaldson, what we did, we had focus group meetings with all levels of staff and faculty. And it was a very large organization, so staff was huge at that time. So we separated the staff into their various sections. So you had janitorial staff, you had maintenance staff, you had the workshop technician staff, you had the faculty teaching in different departments, you had the administrative staff working in the HR departments. All of those people were brought together and asked to contribute towards the development of the mission and vision statements. That happened at all levels in each of the seven TLIs, as were tertiary learning institutions, to be able to get to contribute. So I remember I was part of this process. And what we found happening is by the time the college started its operations officially in the year 2000, you found that there was a greater amount of tie-in and into the organization because the whole idea of the college and what is its focus was something that was a shared vision as opposed to being a socialized vision. When you have personalized visions and nobody else really has any input into what your organization is and where the direction is going, oftentimes in the absence of that individual, the organization begins to fall apart. So I'll give you an example of that. Most of you here are familiar with Bhagwan Singh's group of hardwares around the country, yes? Show of hands, anybody who's aware of Bhagwan Singh stores? Hardwares primarily. Yeah. Okay, so you know, Sabrina, that Mrs. Charan died, Mrs. Bhagwan Singh died, right? About a year
Yes,
ago,
sir.
right? So what are you aware of what's taking place with the company now? Bhagwan Singh group of companies.
I believe her kids are taking over the businesses.
Right. And what ended up happening was no any. All right. So what happened was each of the branches was given over to different members of the family. But whereas the companies were connected to each other, now because they are owned by or they were taken over by the different children, each branch is now separate and has no bearing on the other. So there is no, what's the word I want to use? There is no, um, there is no consistency of behavior in terms of, so if something in the past when um, Bagwan Singh was alive, Mrs. Bagwan Singh, you could have found out if you went to Port of Spain and they didn't have something you could have contacted, they would have contacted the other branch and find out, "Hey, you all have any of this in stock? We have some clients up here who need some," and they would have that type of arrangement with each other. But that no longer exists. I tend to shop at the Piarco branch, uh, and oftentimes I when I go there, there's no contact. In fact, the name has changed from Bagwan Singh's Limited to Bagwan Singh Superstore. So what happened is that in the absence of this individual, the dream or the vision that they had is no longer viable in the eyes of the people who have inherited the job or the work. Anybody is familiar with the Amaro group of companies? Show of hands. Mr. Anybody who has ever heard about the Amaro group of companies? No, that's kind of old, from the 80s and 90s. They used to own and run Toyota International. Ramona, you familiar?
Yes, yes, sir. And
Yeah.
I think the only mention I see here about the name is I think it's Robert Amar
Yes, Robert
on the
is
radio
the.
station. I think it's 104.7.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, very good. And what happened was when his father was alive, Robert Amaro and as Robert and Robin, they they owned the Amar group of companies, which started with the car sales and servicing and manufacturing. So when they stopped the assembly of cars here in Trinidad, Toyota Amar became the representative or franchise holder for Toyota vehicles in Trinidad. Toyota being a type of vehicle that was very critical about its quality, became very popular, and of course the strength of the company grew from that. When the father died, however, the company had started under Robert and Robin. It started to expand into different activities. And again, it was a personalized vision because these guys didn't share the vision that the father had in terms of the development of Amar Group of companies. And as a result, the Amar Group of companies started to falter. Um, the different brothers had different focuses, different visions, and therefore what ended up happening was the group of companies fell apart, and eventually Toyota came and took the franchise away from Amar because by that time they weren't paying enough attention to how that that service was being offered, and they ended up losing it because there was a lot of complaints about the lack of service that was taking place in the organization then. So again, the problem there is the difficulty with personalized vision is that in the absence of the person, the vision fails, because nobody shared in that vision. All right, and that happens a lot with a lot of family enterprise in particular until it begins to transcend the family or organization. I know some of the business students would be aware that we actually study that in family enterprise, managing family enterprise. So that's one of the things that we start to look at in terms of broadening your vision and mission statements. So as a leader, it means, therefore, what we have to pay attention to is that if we are coming into an organization that doesn't have clear vision and direction, it is important to create one because it has its purpose. It's very strong. But the one that we create must be something that is a shared vision within all the current members of the organization. And when we bring new people on board, we have to ensure that they are inducted into that shared vision in a manner that they start to feel involved in the process. And that is really a very important role that leaders have to take in an organization. Sorry about that, guys. All right. So the we can't underestimate the function of the vision in an organization. That is going to be really important in determining how the organization operates, the level of commitment you're going to get from the people who make up the organization, and the willingness of people to sacrifice to say, okay, we won't be asking for increases in salaries this year because we know the company's under stress. We're just happy to have a job and be here, so that when you go through periods of downturn, you have a group of individuals who would stand firm with you and help you build through that period. We saw some of that activities taking place in during the pandemic, for example. A lot of companies were able to maintain their staffing by committing, to paying people their salaries regardless of not really running the business for a period of time. And that type of behavior would have created a sense of commitment by the employees with the organization, because they're not viewed as just numbers on a sheet. They're viewed as important elements in the way in which the organization runs, and it's the strength of the organization basically. All right, and that's something that leaders have to understand. You can't run an organization without the people in it, and if the people don't feel committed to the organization, then there's a serious problem with that. So this is why when we talk about leadership and vision and mission, we're talking about something that motivates people, that helps people to focus on what's going on and guides us into what we would like to do. So it's not what the vision is; it's what the vision does that is important in the long run. What does it do for the organization? And that is dependent upon the leader developing a situation in which everybody feels committed and shared into that particular process. So that's one of the things that helped Costat survive some of its worst time frames, because a lot of us who started with the Ministry of Education, then left the Ministry of Education to take in positions at Costat, because we had this agreement that we wanted to see this particular vision move forward. All right, a lot of which we were able to accomplish. We still have some work to do, but of course, work is never done. Huh? All right. So, as you can see here, especially if the work that we're pulling, we're doing is for positive purpose, that's really going to be a very important commonality that we have to look for. We have to believe that the work we're doing is to move our society forward into a better place. And that is the intention of what the college was all about. At the time the college was being put together in that latter part of the 1990s, the tertiary level participation rate was less than 10% of the population, 10% of the schooling population. So that meant that if you had 100,000 students coming out of the secondary school system, less than 10% of them were moving on into tertiary education, which would have included A levels, any positions that were at any of these TLIs, and the University of the West Indies. Now, interestingly enough, what happened was back in 1988, the University of West Indies used to be free. Huh? In fact, participation rates were pretty high. The government paid your tuition all the way up to 1988. I actually graduated from the university in 89, and in 88 I ran into this crisis where what was called well, it wasn't called GATE back then. It was called CES. Um, so this the government paid your tuition all the way through at the university. In 1988, we were in the midst of an IMF involved situation where we were in the grips of owing the IMF a lot of money, and we went into these program restrictions and government cutting spending. They didn't really have much of a choice. In fact, at the end of 1980, 89 into 1990, we had a revolution, or we had a crisis here. We had the coup attempt. That's to tell you how bad things were from a financial point of view. And I remember that final year that I was at university, my mother mortgaged the house to be able to pay my bills, because at that point in time we had to start paying our tuition. And unlike the way the school system works in currently, which is semester based. Back then, we did courses for the entire year. Um, so I had to pay all of my tuition for the entire year. So it was a lot of money all at once that was required to pay tuition. And as I said, I had to get the house mortgage to be able to pay that, which put a lot of strain on a lot of families. Which meant by the time I was finished and with the degree, there was no way I could have gone back into the university to continue my studies because there was no, there, I had to go work. I had to find a job. And then, of course, we were in the middle of the recession and it took years for me to find a job. When I say years, I started to actually work in 1997, which is when I started to work with John Donaldson Technical. Um, it took it took a number of years of trying to do different things and working in part-time jobs, doing all kind of things before I was able to find a more permanent type of job. And then by the year 2000, I went across to, well, actually not 2000, 2007, I made the transition across to Costa, retiring from ministry education and coming across there. So again, the reason why I came across to Costa was because I believed in its vision and mission statement to move us forward. All right. And in order for us to increase the amount of tertiary education spaces that were available for the college for the country to move forward, we had to create um, really, primarily what it was is really authentic opportunities for students to be able to acquire tertiary education. Because one of the other instances that took place there is that because there was this huge gap in tertiary education, you had, well, government started different programs to try and encourage more study because you can't move a population into the information age without training. And you have to remember too, by 1990s, the internet had been created. So we had a whole set of that development going on as well. So to move into the information age, it was necessary to move the country away from its function, its focus on secondary and primary production into tertiary and well, information development and information production. To do that, of course, you need to get people more qualified, which is why most of you all are in school to become more qualified in areas to facilitate a country that is now more focused on tertiary development or tertiary production, tertiary type services and tertiary level production that's taking place. What was taking place was also a situation where a lot of private companies were cropping up and creating these so-called learning opportunities that that led to some problems because a lot of the organizations that came to bear at that time weren't accredited and they were offering degrees from universities abroad. So basically, they were importing degrees from abroad that didn't necessarily have a linkage to what the country's requirements were. So there was a disconnect there. And secondly, a lot of those degrees weren't accredited anywhere in the world, which led to the development of the ACTT. So if you look into the history of the country, you'd also see that one of the things that featured in the development was the importance of the ACTT. Where is it? Somewhere here. Um, right, so this is where our act came into place. Who's that coming in there? Somebody could let them in? While I looks for this. All right, so the milestones and achievements, right, so accreditation. That was a critical part. That took us a lot of work to get people in, to get the organization into qualifications. That's Jonathan Brooks. See a comment. Okay, Faith, no worries. Well, she's probably gone by now. Welcome, Mr. Brooks.
Afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. I saw your message where you said you're going to run a bit late. All right. So, so we're still just working on one area here. So I kind of have to speed up a little bit because I have another class coming up at 5. All right. So we understand the importance of the positive vision and mission, the objectives of the organization, the importance of the the purpose of the organization is going to be critical. That is a critical element that we're looking at there. Okay. Um, right. Now, when we are looking at working towards positive change, having a positive thing is going to be important because if you don't feel as if the work that you're doing is going to lead to some sort of positive activity, then you're likely to not get bothered by it, or you'll feel less committed to it, and your level of commitment will be one that is more superficial in nature. That's going to be an important element. One of the other things that took place or takes place during organizations' existence is making changes. And that was something that we engaged in with the Costart movement because to the shift from the Ministry of Education's system or academic year into the way our academic year works here, you realize there's some overlap, but for the vast majority of you guys moving into a trimester system away from the the semester system or the two semester system that partially exists in the secondary school system, there is a sort of disconnect. And what ended up happening is that the terms of employment changed for most of the people engaged in that activity. So, for example, as a teacher, accustomed to getting August vacations, Easter vacation, and Christmas vacations, those vacations were lost. And the amount of time off that teachers generally in the secondary and primary school system experience was eliminated in the employment, and that type of change created a lot of discontent among workers moving from one organization to the other. um, More so for the faculty than for any of the administrative staff, because the administrative staff run on a different type of system. So for when faculty came across, it meant the vast majority of my colleagues, for example, didn't come across because they weren't comfortable with losing that amount of benefits for a lower salary. And that was another thing that happened when I came across. I also had to take a salary deduction as well. So I did all those things because I felt as if, the purpose of the organization was something that was important, and I wanted to get involved with that. I wanted to have that level of positive interaction. But the change was something that we had to also pay attention to. So one of the things that happens in an organization as a leader is that you have to deal with change, and change management requires the use of transformational leadership techniques. So, in order to change an organization, you have to oftentimes break the organization down, make the changes that you want to make, and then refreeze. That's at least what the theory tells us. So, you have the unfreezing process, the change process, and then the reestablishment of the organization after the change. Now, most times what happens is that there's some sort of trigger event. So back then, that was a government intervention. The government intervened into the tertiary education system and made the requirement for that change to take place to be able to make the type of change they wanted to in order to move the human resources of the country forward into being prepared for an information driven in the organization or in our country. All right. Think about another trigger event that recently occurred in the pandemic. The organization had to make rapid changes caused by the pandemic situation. That trigger event had to force us to make changes. So, in the pandemic period itself, we lost a lot of faculty because they were unable to make the adjustment into the online environment and become more comfortable and positive with Even students, we lost a lot of students when we went into the online environment. Um, and now we're in a situation where the organization has to, by default, remain in a very flexible position to be able to handle both face to face and online because of some of the demands put on us by the accreditation committee of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the the demands of our students. Like you guys demand that we keep a lot of our classes online. Some of your courses require face to face interaction because of the physical nature of it. So that's something that has to pay attention. Parts of, like for those of you doing accounting, a lot of your final exams are face-to-face exams in a controlled environment, and that is because of the transfer agreements between yourselves and the ACTT, not ACTT, ACCA organization where you get your transfer credits. So the thing about making change is that what you ought to do is rather than refreeze the organization once the change takes place, is actually to leave the organization in a sort of malleable, slushy position so that further change can be brought to bear on the organization without as much complications that took place from the initial setup. So that it kind of sets it up in that format. The problem with that is that human beings prefer some level of consistency of behavior. Change needs to be more gradual in nature, not sudden. But again, if it weren't for the flexibility of the organization, the college would have shut down um, for during that period of the thing. And with that, thousands of people would have gone home without jobs. A lot of places in qualifications would have been, you know, shut off, so that we'd be back to the situation where a lot of people couldn't access studies, higher tertiary level education. That would be a backward step for the country because we have actually exceeded the requirements of more than 60% of the population graduating out of O levels accessing tertiary education. All right. And that's an important element of what's going on there. All right. So we understand this whole concept of transitioning. And of course, in any period of transition, leadership is critical. Leaders have to display a willingness to understand that whole model and move with it. All right. So I think we can move into the next area, which is inclusivity. So when we're talking about inclusivity, we're speaking about leaders being inclusive and setting up the organization so that it has a commitment to being open and caring about other people. We talked about this before. So it means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, aspects of individuality, such as gender and sexual orientation or culture, that add multiple perspectives to a group's activity. Now, why is this important, this inclusivity? Well, the inclusivity makes an organization stronger because if we all think the same way, we suffer from groupthink. That might actually happen in small organizations or small groups where everybody, like for example, one of the things I don't like to do when I'm grouping students together is to put students in groups from the same program together. And the reason for that is because of the similarity of everybody in that particular group. So let's say we have a group of radiographers here, and I put a group of accountants together. Everybody, because they're coming from a similar background, there's no there's a great deal of similarity between each member, and it doesn't bring different frame of reference or different perspectives from different disciplines to bear up on the problems that you face. So one of the things I like to do is to try and make sure that we don't get this grouping of sameness too much. And that opens us to a wider problem because in the world, in the organizations outside there, what you're going to find is that if you have an organization that's primarily made up of one particular type of individuals that come from one socioeconomic group, then there's a likelihood that everybody would act and think and work in the same manner. When they look at a problem, they'll all come to similar conclusions, similar solutions, and they're not going to anticipate or look out for variations that they could actually be paying attention to, because it's simply because they're more monoculture in nature. It gets worse when you go to international environments where there's a lack of variety or lack of of um, of diversity in the organization. In fact, you'll do a program in the college here on the Psych 103, I think it is, which is understanding human behavior and diversity. Am I correct with that? Yes, no, maybe. Oh, anybody here did Psych 103 yet? Understanding human
Yes,
behavior.
sir.
Yeah, understanding human
Yes,
behavior.
sir.
That program is actually built around this area here of being inclusive. Diversity is a strength. Think about Trinidad itself. We are kind of in a blessed circumstance here because we are faced with diversity every day. We have lots of people from different walks of life. So you go anywhere and you're not going to see the same kind of people just standing up there in a group at a fete or at a party and that kind of stuff. You're going to see a variety of people, which to me is the power and strength of our country, because we already come from a very diverse set of origins. The problems that we face as a result of our key diversities is how people manipulate our diversity into creating subgroupings. So you have the us and them approach to, especially when it comes to elections. We still have this stupid nonsense of tribalism, which really is, if you're African, then you vote for this party, and if you're Indian, you vote for this party. That's nonsense, because you can't think of yourself as African and Indian. You have to think of yourself as Trinidadian, and as a Trinidadian, you are of a diverse nature. I think there was one. I think it was Desmond Tutu who described Trinidad and Tobago as a rainbow nation. Not that we're gay, but that we are we come from so many different walks of life. It's important that we understand that that diversity is our strength, but also a weakness. So we have to remember that. So that diversity brings strength to an organization, because you're able to look at, if you are open to the contributions from people who come from a different mindset as yourself, you're open now to a perspective that you're not capable of bringing to a problem or to a situation, and that's a very important thing. That's one of the first issues with leadership and diversity, to recognize the potential strength of having a diverse view of the world around you coming from these individuals. That's a really important thing. So it means that as a leader in a diverse circumstance, you have to exercise all of the skills that effective listening, empathy, communicating, dealing with conflict, and all of that type of thing. Those are the heavy skills that leaders need to practice when they start to work into that. Because diversity also creates a bit of conflict, and conflict is something that has to be managed. Now, most of us, when we engage in group or teamwork and come across conflict, one of the first things we do is avoid it. So we try to avoid the elephant in the room that's causing this conflict. And that avoidance factor is actually a negative thing. It is more important for us to air the differences and work through the differences in a civil manner, not yelling and shouting and cussing at each other, but in a civil manner. But sometimes it requires an absolute breakdown before we can get things going. So it's critical and important for leaders to encourage this level of inclusivity, because it makes us a stronger organization in the long run. That's a really important element. All right. And the thing about it too is that we have to be careful that we're not overcoming the variations, but we are celebrating the variations. Now there's a problem here, in that a lot of people And there's a group that's going to be dealing with this. Let's see which group is going to be dealing with that. That is complex organizations, teams and groups. See, we have all of those things there. Um, being in communities. So yeah, you're gonna get all of these 7, 6, and 9 chapters are gonna tackle some of the issues about variations and differences and that type of stuff. So lots of learning to come um, when it comes to inclusivity. Because one of the things that some people like to do when they come across variations in their organization in terms of people is the tendency to try and get everybody to think the same way. That's not a very good idea. You don't take a difference. It's sort of like this. If you're involved in a significant relationship, half the time it's something about that individual that's totally different to you that attracted you to them. And if in your silly mind you go about trying to change that individual to make them more like yourself, then the relationship is likely to get very boring. You hear about this thing when couples are together, they tend to resemble each other. That's kind of like what's happening in the organization in that thing. If we use that symbolism and we come across to the world of work, in organizations where you have teams that are operating together for a long time, they begin to think like each other. And those differences begin to, and variations begin to disappear because you're no longer looking at the difference, but you're looking at the person or individuals as with some level of sameness. That's a danger because you're actually reducing the possible strengths that you have because we all start to think about it. It's important for us to recognize that we shouldn't smother that difference, but encourage that difference to rear its head in the point of having a conflicting idea to one that the general group will come across. So if you go to a country like the United States, where there's big swaths of the area that is just one type of population living there, um, you can understand where an organization will suffer from this kind of inclusivity stuff. So think about if you were to migrate to part of the country like that in the middle of the middle midwestern states of the United States, for example, and go to live there, you'd stick out like a sore thumb. And what will end up happening is that, eventually you might get, um, face a lot of discrimination, a lot of thing, but you'd be like a star there because you'd be the only difference in a field of corn. Right? Think about it from that perspective. How they treat with you and how your leaders will work with you is going to tell you a lot about how they appreciate and how inclusive they are going to be. So that's something you could pay attention to as well. All right, so we understand why it is important to have differences in the organization, and therefore it is important that we create a environment in which we are open to that that those differences coming in, especially when you have a dominant culture that faces the that governs the organization. It happens, interestingly enough, in religious organizations a lot, in that the dominant thinking is based upon the faith that is in existence in that group. So in church communities in particular, there's a great because of course the community is going to be made up of people worshiping in the same manner. Um, and that in itself tends to create problems if somebody comes in from a different background. It can create some issues in relation to that. So that is something you want to pay attention to as well. All right. Um, when we are being inclusive, we also have to practice the language of inclusivity, which is we need to avoid the excessive use of the I and me phrases and work more with the we and us. We also want to stay away from the us and them activities as well. So you want to word your statements with inclusivity as part of the setup for it. All right. Another element that we have to pay attention to is how we go about making decisions. A lot of times we make decisions utilizing democratic methods, but think about what happens in a democratic decision making process. When you have a vote, you might get 70% of the organization supporting an idea, and therefore that idea is the one that goes forward. But the 30% of the organization that did not vote or did not see it that way begin to feel left out. They begin to feel ostracized. They begin to feel marginalized. And that's a dangerous thing for an organization, because 30 to 40% of your organization, or 49% of your organization, not feeling not feeling as if one particular direction is incorrect, or is doesn't accept that particular position that an organization is going in, is dangerous, because you're literally 1% away from having a deadlock. So, what is a better approach, though more costly and time consuming, is a consensus model, meaning that you try to develop a position that everybody feels they can support. Now, it would require a lot more communication, a lot more talking, a lot of give and take and cooperation and compromising to be able to find a solution that will be um, appealing to everybody in the organization. And of course, there might be some people you'll never be able to bring in, but hopefully it'll just be those what we call 1% detractors or extremes. The problem that we have to face is that we want the vast majority of people to agree with what we're doing. Unfortunately, in organizations that have to move quickly to market conditions, consensus decision making is most times too slow. It requires too much work and too much effort, because the opportunity that the market presents doesn't allow for that. So it has a place. The democratic decision making and the consensus model, it has a place, but understand that the democratic system of voting is not inclusive. It is actually divisive in nature. As we could see with a lot of our elections here, when we have elections and one group wins, the other groups feel disenfranchised. So use that as an example to kind of guide you next time you're running a group project and there's only five of you all in the group and you're all voting, three people agree and two people don't. And what happened to the two people who don't agree? They feel marginalized. They feel left out. They think their ideas aren't worth the consideration of the group. They start to withdraw. They begin to feel a little funny about um, putting work up to the group because their efforts are not seen as being valuable. So understand the implication of decision making processes that are utilized as a leader. All right. One of the last areas we have to pay attention to in this area is understanding that within the organization, um, inclusivity is important, but we also have to include people to the outside of the organization, those external to you, your stakeholders and shareholders. And it's important that we do pay attention to them because their response to our decisions can, in fact, make or break an organization. All right, so it's kind of important for us to be able to do that. In fact, whenever the college tries to make any major changes, I don't know if any of you all have seen this. The college often involves itself into a lot of focus group activity. Now, we usually do both internal and external focus group activities. So, for those of you, for example, who are doing various programs, we oftentimes meet with people who use our graduates. Those are people who are stakeholders in the organization. It's hard to bring them into meetings to discuss changes we'd like to make in programs or changes that have to take place, for both from a shareholder position or stakeholder position, because their level of commitment to what we're doing and its degree of importance to them is neither here nor there. So therefore, we have to do things to kind of encourage them to get into that situation. So it's important for us, and there's a diagram here that actually kind of puts it all into perspective, It's important for us to make sure when we're including the individuals who are external to the organization, um, to help with decision making, they're likely to fall into one of these four areas, because the what we're doing as an organization might be of very little importance to them, or it might be of high importance to them. It depends upon where we are. And of course, based upon what we're doing, they're either going to support it or not support it. That makes sense? So this is where you're likely to find your stakeholders and shareholders outside the organization falling in. And therefore you'll have to develop the strategies necessary to tackle with this issue. Everybody's following this area. So we understand that inclusivity has a wide spectrum of activities attached to it. All right. The next element is empowerment, and this has a lot to do with power, so much so that we have a chapter that is going to track with power and influence, and a couple of things. And of course, we spoke about change as well, so that Ms. Brown and company will be tackling that chapter by themselves to wrap us up in terms of managing change or leading change. All right. So let's look at empowerment. So what is empowerment? There are two aspects to empowerment that the model speaks to. The sense of empowerment that individuals feel in an organization where they feel that they can and should take control and take power of the things that are taking place in their organization. And the second element to that is the conditions that are created in the organization that promote that level of empowerment. Now, the importance of empowerment as a leader is this is your responsibility. It is important that you have members of your organization feel empowered in your organization and feel that they can actually work and do things without having to come to you to get permission to do it as the leader. Secondly, for you to be able to get people to do that, you have to create the environment that doesn't prevent that from happening. All right? It means that it's a balancing game. You want people to behave in this manner, then you have to create the environment that will support that type of thing. Because if people feel empowered in their positions, they are likely to bring the best to bear on what's going on. That is important because if you need to create a situation for succession planning in your organization, that is where you're likely to find the leaders of tomorrow coming in. All right. But a lot of people don't like empowerment for the simple reason that um, you threaten the current leadership. All right. So we spoke about this part here about empowerment being claimed by the individual, um, and making sure that the environment or climate is pro empowerment. So at the end of the day, basically, when the responsibility of leaders in a relational leadership model is to ensure that the members of the organization are empowered to act in a particular manner. And the environment that you create in the organization is one in which people are willing to take the risk, because it means that you have to be able to accept that people will try something, not work, and hopefully you set up the situation where you learn from the mistakes. Unfortunately, a lot of traditional leaders, however, or traditional leadership theory, does not encourage empowerment, and they because they can't tolerate mistakes and failure, because mistakes and failure might be too costly to the environment or too costly to the organization. It's unfortunate that that happens, especially in very high stress types of environments or jobs or industries. But understand that it's through our mistakes that we're going to learn the most. All right. So, unfortunately, some leaders have no patience for this type of activity. All right. Now, in order for us to understand empowerment, we have to kind of look at the word itself, power. And as I showed you before, there's a group that's going to be working on that. That is Ms. Khan and company. They're going to be looking at power and influence. So they're going to get into this in a more detailed manner. Um, so what we have to understand is, how do people arrive in positions of power in organizations? Um, excuse me, there is a number of things. Primarily, what happens in organizations, though, is that people end up in positions of leadership. So it's called positional power. So you are based upon the position you hold in the organization that gives you a certain amount of authority. And that authority allows you to dictate to others what they should be doing, at least in terms of their tasks and activities. All right. So it means that with like your manager, for example, can delegate activities and tasks to you. When you get it done, make you report back and find out what's going on in terms of the level of 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 success or not. Now, power has always been seen traditionally as zero sum, meaning I have all the power, you have none. Modern approaches, however, looks to power as being one of dispensing power around. Empowerment is more the movement. The reason for that is again because of succession planning, because in order to prepare people to come into the organization, to take your place as a leader, and you have to remember that that's not something that people are very comfortable with because it speaks more to your mortality or your fragility, actually, and the lack of permanency in terms of people's lives. But understand carefully that the reality is that at one point in time, you're going to have to leave an organization. You're either going to die or you're going to have to leave because you're no longer competent or you're just getting too tired for the position at some point in time. It's going to always happen. But in order for an organization to continue to exist, because remember we already started, the vision and mission statements is not something that is yours. It is something that is more shared. You brought in all these people from different walks of life, and they have to be empowered to be able to bring to bear their influence on the organization. You can't bring all these powerful people together and then lock them up and say, I have all the decision making. We've had that done in Costa once, and it was an awful, awful experience. Uh, the company or the organization just slowed down to a halt during that period because it was a knee-jerk reaction by the board to an issue that came up, and they sort of clamped down on all spending for the college to one individual. So the president was the only person who could have authorized payments for anything. That meant the president, who's supposed to be looking at creating long-term connective strategies for the college to move forward, had to spend their entire day dealing with day-to-day activities and spending money. That is nonsense. That is not the purpose of the president of any organization. All right, but that's the nature of what took place, and it was a very good example of how things can go wrong when you say zero sum game ideas about power. Nobody else can have power. All right, so there are different types of power that exist, and this happens primarily at the same time too. So you have power over, that's the autocratic approach. That is like the managers having power over all the members of the staff. Then you have powers with. So this is where faculty, for example, we are all collaborative in terms of our power approaches over students. And then collegials alongside with the thing. So all students have similar levels of power within the organization. If we think about it that side, collegial approaches to power distribution. All right. So how do people get into positions of power? Well, let's look at it. It's called sources of power, and there's going to be some more developments in terms of this. So there are three bases of power that are social in nature: expert power, reverent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. So, expert power is an individual who arrives in a position of power or is given a position of power or recognized in a position of power because of their technical expertise in a field, be be it of a highly technical nature or a highly uh, requiring a lot more experience. So think about the IT expert in your buildings or your companies that you might be working for. Think about the the person with the most amount of knowledge and information and experience with accounting or management decision making, that type of stuff. Those are the individuals with the expertise that maintain control or are given power in an organization. Another form of power is reverent power, which is has a tendency to attach itself to people who are long-standing members of an organization. They almost end up in what is called guru status. They may not have a positional situation, meaning that they're not a manager, all right, but this guy's been with the company for so long, or this person's been so long, and they have so much institutional information that everybody kind of goes to that person for advice. That's reverence. That's sort of like, you go to the guru to get help kind of situation. Legitimate power, of course, is the power that comes with the position that you hold. So if you are given a job or you earn the job of being the manager or the CEO or the managing director of a company, that's your legitimate power. With that power now comes the opportunity to exercise the next two forms of or sources of power: coercive and reward power. So coercive and reward power are both two sides of the same coin, because they really speak to something that somebody in power will that your manager would do. Coercive means that the individual can deal out punishments. All right, be it loss of jobs, loss of pay, loss of working hours, something along those lines. Coercive power means you're using punishment to make people do the job that they should be doing. The opposite side of that is to be using some sort of extrinsic rewards system, be it increased time off, uh, a bonus to be paid, that type of stuff as a reward side. So one is punishment, one is rewards, and as I said, they're collectively the same thing, but they're both utilized to influence other people and influence what they do and how they do what they're doing. All right, so that's that kind of thing. So we discussed all of those already. All right, intentionally we have some of our problems we experience in terms of our own power is we give up power as individuals. Now, how do we do that? Well, one, when we don't trust ourselves, we give away our power if we are in an organization. Let's say you're in a meeting and you're listening to some sort of decision being made, but you're afraid of saying anything in the meeting because you don't you don't want to attract disapproval. So fear is causing you not to question a decision that's been made. So that's one way in which you can give away your power. All right, and that's something that happens a good bit, especially with junior members of staff when they come into an organization. They often suffer from that because they're afraid of looking stupid. Happens with students in classes as well. And you'd be surprised how often, if you ask the question that you felt was stupid, it opens up a lot of understanding for a lot of other people in your organization or in the classroom. All right. So that actually comes up here. Another option is where people with positional powers or legitimate power announce plans and actions, and this sometimes happens on a Friday evening at 3 o'clock. They call a meeting and they tell you, okay, next week you're going to be doing this, 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 and they strategically do that because what they're trying to do is to avoid anybody questioning what's going on. Any of you all ever worked in organizations where that happens? Late evening meetings in which you're encouraged to contribute but not really. Anybody has an idea of this? Look out for this technique when you start to go to work, okay? That's a sign of poor leadership, decision making. Um, it happens that you so want to end your work week. What ends up happening is you avoid the let's talk about this first before. I think I have some ideas. You're not willing to share because you either don't want to rock the boat or you're just not interested at that time to put in the effort to deal with it. And that's unfortunate because a lot of decisions happen like that around us. We also have the situation where we give people power who they already have, right? So let's say among your group, you might find somebody has is IT student. So you might say, well, let's give the PowerPoint for this person to do. And the assumption we're making is because they're an IT student, they'll be more capable with the software that is utilized for the creation of PowerPoint presentations and so on, or whatever presentation tool you're trying to utilize. That can be so wrong and not funny. Because I've seen situations where IT people in particular, you make bad assumptions. They are IT people because they're doing much deeper work and in terms of not only where software sits, but also how hardware works and what programming is all about. The skills with a particular piece of software is not necessarily something that you could ascribe to somebody who's from an IT background. There's a greater likelihood that they'll understand the mechanics of it, but are they really good at putting together a PowerPoint presentation? Because PowerPoint has a lot more to do with aesthetics and understanding how the written and spoken word is to be utilized in a presentation. That makes sense, guys? And I'm pretty certain that you have given up power in any one of those three situations there. That's something that you probably want to do. Think about, okay? Um, One of the other circumstances when it comes to power is the concept that power is finite and therefore it's it's again all or none. The reality is that the contemporary situation is that power is not a finite resource. You can share your power with other people, and it's really important in the sharing process that we don't create problems. All right. Traditional views about power is that that's not so. Powers are is finite, and therefore I need to hold on to as much power as possible to maintain control over the organization. Um, some people think of people who or leaders who behave in that manner, who share power and give up responsibilities to other people, as being indecisive and avoidance of responsibility. That's a very narrow look at what's happening, because remember here we're talking about empowerment. If you have to empower people around you, you have to give up the controls and the power that you have. And unfortunately, there are some people who are very traditional in their view, even in today's environment, because they come from that zero sum game thinking. A lot of them don't work that way. All right. So it's important for us to understand that as you start to get involved with your leadership practices, that it is important for you to understand that giving away your power doesn't make you weaker. It actually makes you stronger because people will trust you more. But it means you also have to be careful when you're giving up power. You just don't, you can't hand somebody responsibility through delegation and not also hand over the power and authorization to do it. It's sort of like you tell somebody, go and make copies for you at the photocopier, but you don't give them an authorization code. So you've delegated a responsibility that you have hold all the authorization for, but you don't empower them by giving them the codes to do the work. So when they come back to you and say you can't you couldn't do it because you didn't have a code that works on the photocopy machine, how is that person going to feel? They're going to feel like you set them up, which is what happens a lot of times. Because I've seen this happen, especially in the public service, where people are, I mean, they still think in this kind of Machiavellian thinking in terms of control of power. They will set people up, especially new people coming into the organization who are full of vim and vinegar, as they say, and they will give them and delegate responsibilities over to them, but not give them the authorization. And when they eventually fail at trying to get the job done because they don't have all of the tools necessary to perform the job, it's a they feel as if you get set up, and that's exactly what took place there. Um, and as a result, the new person coming in is going to withdraw their support for the person there. But all that was trying to be done there was to teach you, I have the power, you have none. You have to wait for me. And that's a very short-sighted view of how power works in the organization. And of course, with that type of limitation, the organization is not going to generate a lot of powerful potential for moving forward, because you're withdrawing from the rest of the organization the potential for growth through their activities, because you want to control everything. So that hoarding of power is really something that they have to pay attention to. So careful with what you're doing there. Self-empowerment is something that you also have to lead by example, kind of thing. So you have to show others um, that you want yourself as well. If you're a follower, get information, which is a form of education that you're going to be doing. All right, leading, actually taking part in empowerment exercises, inspiring people, and so on. Structuring your day and your work so that it provides you with opportunities for learning and taking charge, providing the resources for the jobs to get done. So we said, if you're delegating responsibilities to other people, make sure they have everything they need to get the job done. Don't set up people. Mentor people who may be having problems with taking up responsibilities in the organization. Help them, and of course, actualize it by do it. Give people over. Don't be hovering over them, micromanaging their activities and stuff like that. Everybody kind of hates that. Of course, if you have somebody who's um, junior and very, very green, you might want to, put them with somebody who will help them and that kind of stuff. Uh, all right, so I think we're good with self-empowerment. All right, so we spoke about this before, mattering and marginalization, and empowerment is also related to this, because you have to ensure that when you are putting things together, you're making sure everybody feels that they matter in the organization. Um, so if you empower only one group of individuals, the rest of individuals in the organization are not going to feel as if they matter. Think about it from this um, this perspective. Most organizations have uh, administrative staff, personnel, whatever you want to call it. They have operational staff, and they have staff that deals with the maintenance of plant and equipment, um, which we call custodial staff. And oftentimes, the organization itself places restrictions on the activities of janitorial staff or custodial staff by saying to them, you can't be in the front offices, you can't be here, you can't do some of the activities in this particular way or this particular time, so that they're looked upon as being almost like second class employees of the organization. More so, members of the staff itself treat with janitorial staff and custodial staff in a hands-off manner, where almost as if they feel scorned by the organization. How do you think that feels from their perspective? This is something that, as a leader, you have to pay attention to. Remember, those people are at probably the most riskiest job on the plant. They're putting themselves at risk. So it means that their position and their ideas matter, and you have to make it clear that their position matters, because they are quite easily marginalized in the organization. If we end up marginalizing too many sections of our organization, this is especially as your organization begins to grow and get bigger, any segment can start to feel as if they don't matter, or they feel marginalized by what's taking place by the leadership in the organization. Um, especially if you have like a group of people in leadership positions. It's oftentimes can happen because it might be a group within the organization that doesn't share some of your ideas and views, and therefore, what we spoke about this before, because they didn't vote for a particular decision that the overall group made, they start to feel as if they are being marginalized because, well, all they didn't agree with what we were saying, so all they, have to take what all they get, kind of, and that's the kind of attitude that we kind of get started to get situations going on, and that's a really negative thing that happens in organizations um, when people are uh, pushed into the margins, and that therefore damages the organization. As a leader, you have to pay attention to the situations that can create this marginalization phenomenon in your organization. It's not a phenomenon; it's actually a reality. All right, so that's something you have to pay attention to. Ensure when you are generating your empowerment or environment that you ensure that everybody has access to this particular thing, and that is a critical element. You are creating an environment that encourages people to take initiative, to take responsibility, to take a risk to get something done, to find solutions to problems that we may be facing because they're coming from a different position in the organization, different perspective. That's important. But make sure that that environment encourages everybody to do that. All right. Try to eliminate all the fear attached to making those decisions because that was negative to the environment. So those are things you have to pay attention to when you're dealing with empowerment. One of the other things that you have to pay attention to, if you're coming into a leadership position into an organization that already exists, you're going to find that you're going to come across what is called organizational culture that might be negative. And that is a bigger, harder problem because you have to really work much harder at fixing those problems coming up there. That's a bigger uphill value because it means you have to kind of do a organizational reset. Um, that oftentimes happens when you have a change at top leadership or executive leadership in an organization. You have a reset that takes place. Uh, thing. We talked about the importance of delegation and the the care we need to take place when we are delegating information. We have to not only delegate the responsibilities or the duties, we also have to delegate the authorization because we don't want to make people feel as if we, setting them up for things. Um, don't do that, and that's a dangerous thing. I mean, it's a lot of people in leadership positions love to do that because it makes them look good and it makes everybody else look incompetent, and that is not necessarily a good way because eventually your staff will walk away from you if you continually do those kind of things. All right. So the next element, of course, is ethics. We still have to run a little. So we talked about this, the ethical, moral values of leaders. So uh, what the relational leadership model is one that is based upon high ethical values and morals. So what's the difference? Ethics has to do with those social rules that govern our conduct and especially determines what we believe is right or wrong. These ethics are also, so we have a lot of things about the origin of the word and stuff like that, but ethics and moral values are like very similar, all right? And it's because everything here in ethics and moral values govern behavior. And what is seen today as good ethical behavior can also be a problem um, because one of the issues that happens with ethics and moral values is that there's a transition of thinking when it comes to it over time frame. So some of the issues that we face is that in the past some things might have been seen as being ethical and moral in your approach, but in the current environment, it no longer holds water. The problem that we have to face, besides that issue, is that you need to be clear about what are your real values that you hold dear to you. And I talked about that a lot of times before. Pay attention and evaluate your behavior when things go wrong, not when they're going well, but when things go wrong, when you experience loss and that type of stuff. Pay attention to what you did and how you did things then, because that is what we call your true north. That's the true indicator of who you are as a person. Ensure that those things coincide with the ethical values that the organization you're joining, because that's another issue that you're going to face. If you have a particular set of values and you join an organization in which those values contradict some of the values that you have, you're going to experience something called cognitive dissonance. That cognitive dissonance will force you to make a decision at some point in time. You're either going to say, I can't live with this and move away from the organization, or you're going to compromise your own values and start to feel more worse and worse about about what you're doing and that type of stuff. It's going to lead to a sense of self disgust, of being almost two faced in the way in which you're running your life. That's something you have to pay attention to because that leads to a lot of mental issues. Um, Another element that we have to pay attention to is that most organizations, for all of you all who are in any form of training in areas like accountancy, in for those of you in the medical field, there are established standards of behavior. Even teachers, we have a teaching code as well. As students in the college, you all actually have a code of student conduct as well. I don't know if you're all aware of that, but that exists in documented form. Those things dictate our behavior as what is acceptable and permissible behavior in all of these environments. And a lot of this is required because of the problems with international variations of ethics and ethical values. Now, this area is it's very wide. We therefore have two looks at that same thing. We have chapter 6, presentation 3 with Miss Monica and Miss Ali. And we also have a second view at it from the DAF textbook by Singh and Glaude. Just remember there's a distinction. There's two chapter 6s, but they're from two different focal points. One is organizational and one is from the relational leadership model. All right, I think that was a new person that pulled into class. Caleb, oh no, he's there already. All right. Okay, so those codes of ethics that they were set up especially after a lot of the failings of the organizations outside there, especially accountancy. Recently, accountancy had to go through a period of heavy reflection and renewal in terms of their action that they had to go through because of behavior of certain large players in the accounting field. It was really horrible. All right. So at the end of the day, what we believe is right and wrong, good and bad kind of stuff, good and evil, is based upon our morals. And the problem with it is, one, it changes over time. Two, when you move from one place to another, what is seen as being right and wrong is it becomes variable. So as a result of that, you have to create standards that hold across all environments. All right, so um, it's sort of like corruption. Corruption is viewed in Western culture as a negative, but in Eastern culture, what we call corruption is seen as normal activities in some Eastern cultures, right? So if you have to get anything done, you have to pay somebody to get their job, to for them to do their job, as you know, gifts and bribes and stuff like that. So something to pay attention to. Of course, from an international standpoint, that is something that we frown upon. It's called the corruption index. For those of you who want to learn about that, go and look and see where countries score in terms of the corruption index or the ease of doing business index. Both of them are related across the board. All right. So the philosophy of the relational leadership ethics leadership model is one that is based upon this whole values driven thing. The concept or the idea, and because I need to kind of speed this up a little bit, is that because of the failings of leaders in the past, it the the idea is that we need to set up a model that that holds ethical and moral values as the cornerstone of the practice of leadership, because for too long we've had circumstances where the leadership has not been held up to the values that really determine us as being right or wrong. I mean, we still see this nonsense taking place with current leadership around the world. People are saying one thing and doing the absolute other, lying in front of your face, denying that it's a lie, or just sometimes absolutely ridiculous things are happening. Um, Ridiculous claims are being made, and they're all being said, oh, this is my point of view, this is, I have a right to feel this way. That is where most of us disengage with leaders. That's what causes that anti-vaccine, that anti-leadership vaccine, because not only does that happen, but it also alienates people in your organization and marginalizes people in the world around us with the leaders that we have. We disengage because we can't trust them. We don't feel as if they really are paying attention to our needs as a country or as a group of individuals, because they just seem to be there for only what they can get. All right, and it's one in which, I mean, it's the feeling has gotten worse, not better, since the 2000s. All right, every time I do this course and I get to this part, I always get upset because of what I see happening around me from an ethical standpoint. All right, it's almost as if ethics doesn't exist in politics. You know, and I know there's one prime minister that made the statement that politics has an ethics of its own, and that's not true. Ethical values and moral values, though they may change over time, they gradually change over time. They don't just change suddenly. But there's ethical value and there's ethical behavior that we expect. Right? When you put somebody in a leadership position or you appoint somebody to a leadership, you don't want that person suddenly coming out and being the negative that affects the organization. And that's absolutely horrible. That's something that you want to really, you know, avoid happening, and you want to therefore choose people who, you know, whose value systems, you know, kind of reflective of, you know, nice people, you know. And interestingly enough, you know, most people are nice, huh? They are good people. It's just that when they get into organizations, they suddenly start to get put in situations, and this is where, in chapter 6 from the leadership textbook, the one that we're currently looking at, no, not the daft, you're going to come across dilemmas, ethical dilemmas. How do you respond to those things is going to be an important element that you have to pay attention to, because a lot of these ethical dilemmas present themselves to people in leadership positions when other people step into your office and say, hey, you know, so and so was part of the whole thing, and you know, if you want to keep them as a client or you want to keep them as this, you had to organize some things for them on the side and whatnot. So this is where the kickbacks come in, the you know, the blatant. Well, if you get this, if I get this contract with you, I will be able to kick back a little something here. All of those things that we hear about, and because we hear about them, I mean, where there's smoke, there must be fire. Some of it is happening. This kickback situation is always going to be something that we're going to be paying attention to. So, but what happens with us is that we keep on hearing more consistently breaches in ethical conduct. That is what we continuously hear all the time. So The model is trying to posit that for the vast majority of people, ethics is a critical part of the leadership models that need to be in place in our countries. All right, and without it, we are going to end up in a cycle of negative leadership activities, and it's going to encourage some of the worst behaviors in and around us. So something for to pay attention. All right, I'll need to get to. Let me just make sure there's nothing critical here because you all could go through this on your own. Right, leading by example. One of the things that we are asking you to do is to do a self-assessment. You need to go through the exercise thinking of yourself as a thing and ask yourself the question, what do I stand for, and how far am I willing to advance the common good or to do the right thing. Another part of that question is how far am I not willing, or how far am I willing to advance myself rather than the organization. That's the questions you need. These are hard questions, huh? And it's one that requires absolute honesty for you to go through. What do you really stand for? You must do that. You can't not know answers to these questions, especially if you're going to take on any sort of leadership position. Think about yourself as a parent and the influence that you're likely to have on children around you, that you're you're going to have, and not even your own children. It could be children of your brothers and sisters or other people in your groups. As a adult and a leader in your circumstances, you have a responsibility to lead by example. And that's something that a lot of us seem to have forgotten. All right. So, um, because what we do actually teaches us more than what we see. Just remember that element. All right. Let's go to the next aspect, which is the final aspect of process orientation. And basically, what process orientation is talking about is that all of the elements of this model, all of these elements here, have to be set up in a process oriented method so that eventually each one of those things becomes repeatable, systemic types of activities that we can get into. Because the process will show us, by it being process oriented, it means we are likely to be able to repeat activities, make improvements, and and correct what's going on. All right. So it's really important that we pay attention to the whole process or the whole model being process oriented, to say it better. All right. How you go about creating the purpose of the organization. It's a process orientation. How you go about being inclusive in the organization has to be a process that is repeatable, demonstrable, and measurable to see to make sure that you're actually getting the things that you're doing. How do you indicate that you're ethical in your decision making? So again, it's a measurement. If you have standards that exist already in the environment, you measure your activities and outputs based upon the standards that exist. Okay, so everything has to be process oriented. All right. Now there are a couple of elements that they want us to focus on in the text here, and I'll get to those and point them out to you. Um, all right. The biggest problem that comes up with being process oriented is the time it takes to get things done. Um, you have to spend time evaluating the processes that you're utilizing, and that requires getting together with people, collaboration, reflection, getting feedback, and here we're talking about measurable feedback, not just what they call anecdotal information. You have to actually get documented feedback. You have to deal with the civil confrontation that is going to take place. So when you get involved with process analysis, you are going to engage in some conflict, but you're going to have to deal with that conflict in a civil manner, because you can't get into argument, because if you don't do that, you're going to end up with community building falling apart. And there's a chapter presentation on communities, being in communities, that's going to be thing. And overall, you need to go through this process in order to make sure that what you're doing is meaningful, and is meaningful to everybody taking part in the organization. All right. So that's one of the important things that we have to pay attention to, is meaning making. And when we say it's meaningful both from an intellectual position, as well as it's meaningful to me as uh, it means something to me, an emotional from an emotional level. All right, because the only way your leadership practice is going to be a good thing is that it has to be intellectually driven but emotionally charged. If it's not emotionally charged, if you're not emotionally invested in what's taking place, it's not going to matter, and therefore anything will just go. All right, and that's kind of an important part. um, so every part of the process is has well, every part of the model has to be process oriented. The reason why we want things being process oriented is because it needs to be repeatable, measurable, and verifiable. If it's not process oriented, too many things get pushed under the damn thing. And this is why the process of getting to know who you are and what your values are, that's one of the major processes that you have to engage in from a personal standpoint. Um, if you don't go about it in a process oriented manner, it's going to create problems, because you're not going to be doing things. Group activities where you focus on what was done, asking questions, why do we do things like this, and how can we do it more effectively? Those are important parts of the process that you have to go through, especially when you finish any sort of major exercise. It's important for you to do that. You have to ask yourself this from a personal perspective as well. How many of you all do this at the end of a semester? Evaluate what went wrong, what went right, and try to learn from what went on before. All right, that's part of the reflection process that you have to do. Collaboration and cooperation is something that you have to also include in your activities, because too many too many organizations try to create artificial competition within the structure. So they pit managers against each other for different departments, and we, um, we have this nonsense that we have sports days where we set up these arbitrary teams, and all of a sudden you see this level of animosity develop between the teams that is not conducive to bringing the organization together, but rather drives stakes between them. And this especially happens with parts of an organization that are not well liked by people. Anybody knows any part of the organization that employers and employees tend to have problems with? Anybody willing to run a give me a for instance? No. All right. So one of the areas or one of the sections of organizations that oftentimes ends up being adversarial in nature is the HR department, because they're always seen as they don't know what they're doing, and especially if they also include the payroll department. It's a department that comes under question all the time, and it really is problematic sometimes, yeah, because they end up with a very bad rep. All right, um, so collaboration and cooperation is the better methodologies of doing work, and research actually exists to suggest that is absolutely true. So rather than creating competitive relationships in the organization, it is better for you to create collaborative and cooperative um, relationships. In fact, I was just in a meeting with a number of different members of staff, both faculty, administrative staff, technical staff, registration staff. Was just in that type of meeting, and that's the type of meetings you want to do, because Nobody's actually anybody's leader there. Everybody has different roles within the organization, but we're all getting together to look at an issue that we're having and try to bring different perspectives to the decision making. That is the power of collaboration and cooperation. All right. Um, Another element that we have to talk about here is, in fact, it what we're doing in the process to make meaning. I spoke about this already. Whatever you're doing has to mean something, both from an intellectual point of view and also from an emotional point of view. It has to mean something to you. If it doesn't mean anything and it doesn't mean anything to other people in the organization, your organization is going to fail. All right, that's what we're talking about there. Um, so this is what we're talking about in terms of analyzing the process. You get your data from the process, you convert that data into usable information. That usable information is utilized to improve or increase your knowledge about what's taking place. That improves your understanding of what's taking place, which with contributes to the development of your wisdom, and that then drives thought and action. And that action drives another round of data creation, data processing into information, knowledge, understanding, and it's a never-ending flow of thought and action driving thing. The reason it's process-oriented is that every part of the relational leadership process, leadership model, is process-oriented, and therefore creates that sort of cycle of finding information and being able to do it. But the biggest problem with that though is finding the time, because that one of the key things that has to take place, and let me find that here for you guys, is we have to engage in a lot of reflection and contemplation. Now, one of the problems that we often face with this process is the fact that we don't have enough time, or we don't find enough time for personal reflection, and that is one of the challenges that is there that we have to deal with. And we also have to make sure that we are not only looking at what went wrong, but we have to pay attention to what goes right as well. And we have to spend some time thinking about thinking. I know it sounds a little weird, but listen to this. You actually have to think about how you go about thinking, because that is one in which you're going to be evaluating your your ethical values. You have to think about how you come to those things by thinking about the way you thought it. So consider, for example, evaluating a behavior on action in the past and working through why you thought the way you did then. All right. So that actually is thinking about how you think, both in the past and seeing how that affects you now. So that reflection and contemplation is a lot of deep thinking. Unfortunately, for most of us, is that takes a lot of time, and that is the problem that we're going to be facing across the board. That's metacognition. That's what they're referring to there. All right. Also, remember, pay attention to not only what failed, but we also have to look at what went good, what worked, so we can determine and make sure that we get that to happen the next time. All right. So those are things that we want to pay attention. I like what this guy says here. Reflection is hard mental work. The word itself means bending back. The mental work of reflection includes deliberation, rumination, pondering, and musing. I like that. That's a really nice um, quotation from the text itself. I love that word, pondering and musing, because some of the things you have to think about something you did, and try and put yourself back there in terms as to why did you do what you did, why why do you think, or why did you think in that manner in the past. It can be frustrating because given your development today, you might have reacted differently or wanted to react differently, but there were mitigating circumstances around you that prevented you from doing that, or maybe mitigated against you behaving in that manner. But it does allow you to really put yourself under deeper reflection and analysis, which is what is required of you to really find out more about yourself. That's a tricky little thing to do, but it's something that you ought to be doing on a regular basis. All of us, I have to say, I'm guilty of not being able to do this type of reflection regularly. It's not something because we don't get the opportunity to do that retreat, because that is take a break from everything, walk away. That's the purpose of vacations, really, for individuals. But if you think about it from an organizational point of view, the entire organization needs to take re- retreat-based activities to be able to build on its past and move forward. There used to be a big thing in the latter part of the 90s and the early part of the 2000s for departments and the whole company to go on a retreat. Governments did it as well, to go on retreat activities. But its its popularity and effectiveness has been questioned. I still think that the concept of reflection and contemplation is very important for the development of yourself and for the continuation and success of most organizations. Kind of important for us to be able to do that. Um, if not from an organizational point of view, at least from an individual position. It's really going to be an important thing, especially if you want to be, um, what's it going to be, successful in the whole game that we're looking at there. So I'd encourage you all to look at the presentation and try and work through this. Something here I want to give you all to look at. It's a very short summary of I'm going to put this into the WhatsApp chat group for you guys to go look at. When you get some time, I'm going to force you to look at it now because I'm almost out of time here. It's a YouTube video that reviews this entire model that we've been looking at. All right, guys? So there's a lot for us to unpack here. I don't need you, as I said, to memorize any of this. It's something that is going to take some time for you to develop. So therefore, it's important that you spend some time reflecting on the whole concept of the relational leadership model. You have your own chapters coming up to present out of that model and the reinforcement work from the draft. That's really critical and important. But at the end of the day, most of the work that has to be done for this course, you'd recognize, is of a metaphysical nature. It's metacognitive, sorry, not metaphysical. You have to really spend a lot of time in here thinking about things. Because if you don't engage in that level of self-discovery and self-examination, the benefit of this class is not going to present itself to you. It's really, really important that you do that. All right. Any questions? I know it was long. I know it was long, but this is it for me.
No, sir.
We good there? All
Yes, sir, I
right.
get.
All right. So next week we have our first sets of presentations coming up from our first two groups. I've already spoken to them. They seem to be ready to go, but we'll see how it goes. Um, and I will be discussing with them immediately afterwards what their scores are. All right. So, any questions from those groups at this point in time for those who are next week? Presentation 1 and 2. No. If anybody has any questions during the week, post up into the WhatsApp chat, and I'll see if I could.
Next week or the 15th?
It's next week. First
Today's the
presentation.
first.
Yeah, today's the first. The 15th. Oh no, I'm giving you all the next week off.
Yes, you
Right,
have
right,
my help coming very vigorously
right.
there.
So the next week, um, did I not do chapter 2 with you guys? Hold on a second. Maybe I jumped the gun. Yeah, hold on a sec. Today is Wednesday. Oh crap! I jumped the gun with you guys. I didn't present chapter two for you guys, did I?
Listen,
Why did somebody see what happened? Is in other classes I'm a little more advanced than you guys. All right, so next week I'm gonna have to go back and tackle chapter two. But somebody should have pointed that out to me all this. Yeah, you make me set me up. All right, I'll still put the recording of this class up, but I'll have to go through chapter two with you all, which is kind of developmental, so it's after the fact. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes out of order. And it's important, that because it's best that the chapters are presented in order. So next week I will see you guys. Um, hmm, tut tut tut. All right, let me stop the recording. Guys, thanks for listening, even though we're out of order in terms of presenting. So next week I will present chapter two. All right, I'll stop the recording now.
Okay, so
All right, guys.